Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Nathaniel Giles. Now, Nathaniel is an author, lecturer, and religious demonologist. And after being in the deliverance ministry for over 15 years, Nathaniel felt called to bring his gifts and research to a more secular venue. Now, the experiences he had as a child while living in a haunted house inspired him to research the fields of the paranormal and demonology. Nathaniel Giles, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm excited.
Oh, it's great to have you on. I say that to a lot of guests, and because I get into their research and stuff of what they've been doing, and it's just like wow, this person's done a lot of work. If you were to sum up just what you do, how would you sum that up?
Ooh, it's a big question. I My discipline is demonology, specifically religious demonology, and what I've been trying to do is to reverse engineer some of these entities, and so that my time is fulfilled rather with research, applying the research from a hypothesis to an actual doing it in homes. But I spend most of my days reading academic papers, ancient Babylonian texts, Sumerian texts, and applying them to modernity, specifically in malevolent hauntings.
Yeah. Yes, you do. I mean, just looking over, your work and what you've done over the many years, it definitely does come
Yeah.
from that aspect of research. So, I mean, if people have an issue with an attachment or they've got something that they just can't shake off, have you found them coming to yourself and you're able to sort of release that in a sense for them?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In many different ways. So my background is a Pentecostal tradition. That's what I grew up in, and having grown out of that, and yet experiencing many forms of spiritual warfare, I've been able and fortunate enough to take that into homes as well. In addition to that, again, it's my research that has really added value to what I do. And what I found is that far more often, biblical antiquity does have things to say about these entities that we're facing and the belief system that they are a part of.
So, when you do this type of work, is that known as exorcism or?
It can be, and not in an exorcism in the sense of like a Catholic rite, but in a sense of a ritual that actually precedes Catholicism by 1,000 years. What I found that the exorcistic rituals that we have been employing, they were first designed in the Bible to dispel humans, not horns and hooves. And so, in doing that, I've realized that there's a major role that psychology plays in this. And so putting those two together, I've been able to go into homes where murders have taken place and really dispel these. If it's not the stained consciousness of a victim, then it could be very well the disincarnate murderer who has possessed someone. So there's a lot to it, and I'm really excited to talk about it with you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And how many of them have you done of that type?
As far as the murder,
Well,
I had
yeah.
one murder. I'm sorry. Yeah, the I had one murder case that it's left a profound impact on me because it was like I said before, it's one thing to have a theory of possession and what it is when a malevolent entity literally wears someone as their social skin. It's cool to have a theory, but it's far more chilling when the theory comes to life, comes to flesh, and you're standing in the middle of a murder scene with the carpet cut up, and you know there's an entity upstairs in the closet, and you know that the family themselves can't even grieve yet because not only did a murder occur, but there's a malevolent entity still in the home. And so, what I've been trying to do is to reverse engineer some of the psychology within these entities. And I think that a major role that religious demonology has played, it's robbed us of the human aspect of this. And so I think that if we understood demonology, not in the sense of systematic demonology, but in the sense of that we're dealing with really evil people, people who were evil when they were alive, people who are even more evil now, deceased, And so that plays a role into psychology and reverse engineering. Why is it that they're doing this? What is their victimology about? They're not just picking just anyone. You understand? And that is a very fascinating branch of my research.
So when you're doing such I'm going to use the word exorcism. Is that okay to use that word, or would
That's
you?
fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No
Wh-
holy water, but
yeah.
anything.
Yeah. When you're doing that, I mean, what is the process of that without going into too much depth, obviously, with time restrictions?
Well, no, you're okay. First of all, the approach that I employ is a Lurianic rite from the 16th century. During that century, it was what's called the Age of the Demoniac. And so your demonology transitioned from believing it's fallen angels to believing it's the Jewish Dybbuk, or some people call it Dibuk. And so the Dibuk was simply an entity that would lay on a person like a garment. And through possession, they would either cry out for healing or cry out for help or tell my dear loved one that I'm okay. Or there's the second strain of entity that would possess people for malevolent purposes. And so his name was Isaac Luria. He was a Kabbalistic exorcist. What he would do is he would not throw holy water, not that that's not relevant or germane, but he would go to the possessed person and actually have a conversation with the possessor. And it's a fascinating motif in this research, because a lot of people say that it's not beneficial to talk to these entities. And I think that that's a lie. I think that's a deception, because I think that in some cases you have people who have been murdered. And Isaac Luria and Jaime Vital found this. They've been murdered and they can't be heard. Their body's not buried. Go bury me. Give me a Jewish burial. Give me a burial that will honor me. Now, if we consider all of them fallen angels and we don't want to talk to them, then we're displacing and dispossessing victims even after life. And that is a gross indoctrination that needs to be destroyed.
Okay, so absolutely let's go to the murder victim then, for example, because that's what
Yeah.
I'm into as well right now,
Yes,
and
sir. Fascinating.
yeah,
Fascinating.
and so why would some so okay so why would someone that's been murdered then be termed or has been termed in the past as the demon
Mhm.
or the demonic entity when that was just a
Right.
loving soul that never,
Right.
knew what was coming to them in a sense, and they met
Mhm.
at the hands of something terrible. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yes, sir. Why are they called a demon?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
why are they acting like a demon, or why are they possessing someone if that was someone that was innocent in a sense and has now turned into
correct.
this ravenous, soul that just
Yeah.
wants anyone's attention?
Well, it goes back to the ancient Babylonian texts. They were always afraid of encountering an entity, a person, may have been a man, a woman, who died tragically, and for whatever reason, their life was cut short. And so, to the extent that their life was cut short, either in time or experience, they were afraid that because of what that person lacked in life, they're going to go after people who are experiencing what they never had a chance to experience. And so, even in childbirth, we was reading an academic paper earlier yesterday where the midwives they would have a midwife and an exorcist in the same room helping this pregnant woman deliver the child, and the midwife was there to preserve the child inwardly, and the exorcist was to fight off the entities outwardly. And so the entities to them, even in the Levant, there were always entities who, for whatever reason, their life was cut short. And so in that moment between this world and the next, they just outgrew, and they became angry. And they would often possess people and even hurt people who are living the dreams that died with them. And so that's one strain of these entities. That is what some people would call restless spirits. Now, there is a second form of these entities that transcends the microcosm of everything that we know to exist. They have a mentality of a serial killer. They have a belief system that is otherly. They have a value system that they operate on and through. And me as a demonologist and researcher, it's my responsibility to understand what that value system is. It's not enough to catch, I'm not rambling, I get on this thing. It's not enough to catch an EVP and high five each other. It has to be understood. They're operating the second string, the second entity, not the malevolent, restless spirit, but the entity that can step into a room and make people almost die in fear. It's in many cases, it's traumatizing to the people that I've helped along the way.
What is the process then? How long does it take to sort of, to allow that, demonic entity? Well, I'll use those words right now, but that soul, there's another word, to move
Yeah,
on and to let go of this attachment that they've got to the person. What is that process and how long?
it depends. It depends on who and what we're dealing with. Now, in many cases that I've had the privilege of helping people in terms of this, if you have someone who has an attachment on them, that attachment becomes a garment on them. Like I said, they'll wear it like a garment. In the Jewish tradition, the dibuk is literally a skeleton laying on the person. The person's walking with the cane, and you could see it laying on him. Now, to understand the nature of these possessing entities, we have to understand that the first process that they employ is a fact-finding mission about you. Specifically, if they want to possess you, they want to wear you as what Fritz Kramer, the German anthropologist, says, the social skin. It's a fact-finding mission. It will groom you. It will groom you and mold you into something that's easier to enter. And the way they will do that is they will look in your life, the emptinesses, the voids, the hurts, the insecurities, and they will send a thought to you to ask you, do you believe it? In other words, there's a cancer patient. This is absolutely terrifying. This is what we're dealing with, ladies and gentlemen. I had a cancer patient, an elderly lady who was in the fourth stage of cancer, told me that one night she was in her hospital bed. The bathroom door was open a little bit, and it was dark. The light was off. Her daughter is sitting next to her. And now she had a bad diagnosis. Out from the darkness, a voice mentioned her by name and said, "You know it's your time." I got chills. "You know it's your time, just give up." She said, "Do you hear that?" And her daughter said, "Yeah, I heard that. I heard it too. What did it say?" She said, "Well, it's telling me to just give up on life because it's my time." That's the game that they're playing. And so if it can get you to believe it, that's consent. Now it has authority. And so I tell everybody, to answer your question, I tell everybody that I meet in this field who's asking questions like that, this: before you conform to it, it will conform to you. And the key is to shut it off, because there are people who have experienced traumatic events in their life, and they've gotten over it for a period of time until something attaches to them and begins to reopen those same wounds, looking for access. And the purpose of this, the entire purpose of this, is to get you to a point where when it's not just possession, it's not just voices, it's when it wants to make a move. You will be so confused between does it make sense? Between your emotions and their emotions, between your thoughts and their thoughts, and then wham, you'll have exactly what I had happen when a 13-year-old girl murdered her mother. And when we kicked the entity out of the house, it detached from her, and it was as if she woke up, didn't realize what happened.
Are a lot of us, do you think, walking around with attachments that we don't know are there? And can some of those attachments be positive? Can some be negative?
I think yes, to an extent. Now, the attachments that are negative, if they're there, you'll see a heightened sense. In other words, I had a client who, I don't want not a client, that's an awful word. We're still, us the demonology are still trying to understand these different terms. But I had somebody who was dealing with an attachment of suicide. And I began to talk to her about just some of the emotions she was feeling. And I realized that where in her life, like the areas that were a little depressed at one point are a lot depressed now. Awful grammar, but they're extremely like they're 10x the emotions that they usually feel. And at that moment, that entity, there's only three things they want. It's either trying to attach to you, it's either grooming you to be, to be attached to, or it's accessing all of you. And at that moment, that's what really terrifies me because it's not there just to be there. It's there so it can gather itself in one place and in one time in one body, and that can only happen when it wants to make a move.
So
And that
yeah, so it can feel the pleasures of what you're experiencing. So maybe if you've got habits that were never there before,
right?
it's
Oh
getting
yeah,
to experience the pleasures of those habits through some sort of
that's
energy exchange that we really do not understand, right? Um,
100%,
yeah,
100%.
and do you think there's any karmic ties between the entity that attaches to that person and to that person's previous incarnations, if such things exist? Do you think there's something karmic which we don't understand about it?
I haven't experienced that. Not to say that it doesn't exist. I just can say that in my cases, there was usually, I'll tell you this, usually it's a person who has a tremendous amount of potential, who is dealing with giftings or an empathic nature. And because they haven't really manifested that, now they're still gifted, they're still sensitive. And so those entities will come out of the shadows for that person because they feel as if, okay, you're more sensitive than the others. This will be easy work. Does that make sense?
It's almost like a dark room and there's a light in the corner and they see the light. Yeah.
Like a moth to a flame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and do you think some of these people that commit violent crimes, not sort of taking them off the hook because, we can't exactly do that, but do you think some of the more violent people out there, do you think they've had attachments to them in some sort?
100%. 100%. And no, this gets crazy. I think that, and this is possession. It's the molding, the grooming of a person. Now, whereas an attachment, that person can be groomed by that entity sending thoughts, right? Thoughts that are based upon real events. For instance, if your father beat you and it wants access to you, it will have to lower your self-esteem. It'll come back and say, listen, your father, you deserve, that's a big one I've heard. You deserve exactly what happened to you. Don't you remember? And all of a sudden, they'll start to revive those emotions. Now, just as they will groom that person, the people who are prone to stone cold violence, it will have groomed them through genealogy, through a horrible childhood. Jerry Spence, the great defense attorney, said that it's the victims of the victim that we're dealing with. And so there are a lot of these people who have the attachment, not just because they were being groomed emotionally and spiritually, but their childhood, for whatever reason, it's almost as if these entities were also grooming the family around them specifically to raise a predator, a predatory energy, someone who is well aware of its environment and how to blend in until that entity wants to show up. And that's a very chilling reality.
How much responsibility do we have for that kind of action? In a sense, you have to be you have to be willing in at some level to allow that to happen, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. There has to be consent. And that's the whole process. That's the whole modus operandi of these malevolent entities. It's not enough for them to touch. It's not enough for them to smell and to hear. But what they want is to do what they couldn't do before. So whereas like in Isaac Luria and Jaime Vital in the 16th century, they would have cases where they would have virgins who would possess someone. And the person they would possess was a little bit, friendly. And so what happened was, again, we're dealing with an almost a deficiency or a lack of human experience. And that's when they step into someone and you could say, and now you're dealing with a separate intelligence altogether.
Why wouldn't they want to move on? Why wouldn't they want to go somewhere where they've come from before? We'll call it heaven, call it home, whatever you want to call it, the place where we go back to, or whatever that is, because it's really still undefined in my head what that is,
Yeah,
right?
me too.
But why wouldn't they want to at least move on to something better? What's this need to stay at this level? Are they just addicted to wanting to just be here because it's such an addictive like space to be in?
That's a very good question. I could say this as far as my research has led me to believe. Um, we have entities, and this is the only way I can explain it. We have entities who, when they died at the time of their death, like when they should die, right? When it was their time to go, when they did die, they molted. That's the only way I can explain it. Molted. In other words, when they left, they outgrew the shell. And in biblical antiquity, we have this all the time, which is they called them husks, which was essentially this person outgrew every dimensionality of his existence, and then he got bigger or better. And what I'm dealing with now in my research is that there are plenty of cases where this person died before their time, and Yahweh in the Bible got angry with the person who killed them. Isn't that interesting? And again, this is it's all about possession. And I think that this possession issue is necromancy, not at the hands of the possessed, but again, it's someone who was trying to revive themselves. In Ezekiel 13, Yahweh calls them soul hunters. And and again, back into your docu-series, when you step into that dimension, you put your gloves on, put your goggles on, you'll start to see that their value system's different. Blood, blood, blood. Arthur Shawcross, blood, blood, blood. And he said, blood is blood. Why?
Well, can possession be as well in the sense that what if someone or a spirit, let's call it that, wanted to have
Right.
justice for what happened to them,
Yes.
and it's kind of like a lower level of possession that they just want someone to help them to to see through whatever it is they want justice for, not in a mean way,
Right.
but in a way of whatever way that may be, right? And it's kind of a low level kind of possession. Can that happen?
Absolutely. 100%. In fact, here's something very cool. Well, I really, it's so often, in my research, I'm delving into the darkness, trying to realize what's going on. Sometimes you hope to run across a case that really makes you feel better about it. Now that this particular case came from Jaime Vital in the 16th century. Jaime Vital had a favorite student of his, and this kid was an academic par excellence, and he died. And so while Jaime Vital was grieving, he went to sleep one night, had a dream. In the dream, his favorite student came. I love it. And he said, "Listen," he said, "Master, I need help." And he said, "So tomorrow I will come to you." I got chills. "And I want you to pray for me." See, oh, again, this dogmatism that demonology has existed in has to be laid to rest, because now we have a disincarnate spirit who's asking for prayer. Doesn't fit, right? There's a whole different thing going on here. It's a whole different value system. But the next day, Jaime Vital was locking up his office, was walking to his home, cooking some dinner. He thought to himself, Jaime, maybe that was just a fluke. There's nobody, and all of a sudden, next thing he knows, there's a knock on the door. A woman with her 12-year-old child, little girl. As soon as he opens the door, the little girl looks up at him and says, "Hello, master. I told you it would come." And then, yeah, he asked for prayer. And it's very troubling, because it goes back to the victimology here. Let me say this, and this is something that really grieves me. It is very possible to have one person who's possessed, and that person possessed with both the victim of the murderer and the murderer itself. And if it's possible, one time, then our religious demonology, at least in the dogmatists, falls apart. And we really have to see what's truly going on here.
Absolutely. I'm just going to mention this. I am actually talking to an actual serial killer right now, because some of my work
Okay.
is going more into that side of it. that I'm going to start putting out soon on my channel. And I'm actually speaking to Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. And,
Mhm.
he talks about, that there was a possession that, he felt that he was possessed. I mean, it's to some, it may just be a great excuse,
Right.
right? And he called his demon Rex.
Mhm.
And Rex,
Yeah.
it was the only way, when he did the murders, it was the only way for him to feel close to Rex.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And in psychology, they would have an issue with that. They would say, okay, that's the dissociative personality disorder. It's not. In many cases, I'm telling you, man, in many cases, there are people who would use it as an excuse, but there are also people who had urges that were not their own, who would have fantasies it was like a room. One second you step into it, you're a part of it, it's a part of you. And then once that entity has warned you, done what it wants to do, it leaves you like a shell. In the Bible, it would call them locusts because just as it'll molt and leave the skin here, and it's moved on to another location.
But you still didn't have to choose to do those murders or
Right.
murder, right? You had a
Correct. Correct.
choice.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a measure of consent and there's currency involved. There always is. I had a case not too far away from here that I didn't take. I didn't take it because he was a young kid. He's about maybe 20, 22 years old, and he had an entity that would possess him, and it was like he was a different person. The whole thing. And his mother was crying and said, he's violent. He doesn't respond to me in the warm ways that he does usually. And so I got him on the phone, and after 25 minutes, I said, "Listen," I said, I know I can help you just by talking to you. I know that there's room where we can actually work with this." And I said, "Now, if I drive the 2 hours, my own gas money and time, are you going to let me help you? Because if not, I don't want to come, right? I'd be wasting both of our time." So this is what he said, and this gets back into the consent. He said, "Well, sometimes I enjoy it because when it possesses me, I can look at people and I can know more about them than I usually do." And I said, "Okay." And this gets into victimology, rather, the pathology of the possessing entity. He said, "So whenever I'm in that moment, I'm better. I'm more than I usually am when I'm just me." And that comes back to that relationship of feeding. And what always happens without fail is when that entity is through grooming you, it knows that it has footholds. It will wear you until the perfect time for it. And then once it has you, it has you. Next thing you know, you're holding a bloody knife, wondering why in the world you're in someone else's home. And all the times when you thought you were using it, it's been using you, and it will abandon you. Sometimes it will abandon people to the point where they're dead, to where their body, I mean, even drug addiction, sometimes it will use them just up, spoiled. And that's what I told him. I said, "Listen," I said, "right now you're thinking you're using it equally, right? Like it's going to use you this much. You're going to use it." I said, "No." I said, "You have to understand what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a master manipulator, someone who can understand, watch this, the evolution of humanity way more than we do, understands even on the biological level, the psycho, all of it. They got it." And to someone who's given consent to that kind of entity, it's very difficult to break that bond because now they're wearing each other.
Yes. Yeah, and it becomes an addiction on both parts then. If you were just to, imagine yourself, with light around yourself, right? As a kind of
Mhm.
example, and just, just to say that, if there's anything there, you have to go, right? You don't have my
Yeah,
permission to be here. I mean, is that enough just to
it's
to
loitering.
yeah, is that enough just to move things on sometimes? Because you want to say that it's coming from you.
Right. Right. It depends. Again, it depends on the person we're dealing with. Like if they've done some kind of magic ritual, that entity will feel right. Yeah, yeah. That entity will feel at home, and it'll just say, "Listen, man, you have no idea what happened." And a lot of these entities are sanctioned. Now, this gets crazy. They're sanctioned to be there. They have authority to. And when I do these interviews, I tell people, listen, they're playing a different game here. It's not just they're playing by different rules, but they're playing by different rules because there's a different game involved. And that's why when you get into the pathology of a serial killer, they'll tell you their belief system's way different. They can blend in, but they'll know you inside and out. And you'll just be sitting there thinking, okay, I'm talking to Joe. You're not talking to Joe. That dude he's got you figured out. It's crazy. It's wild. It's a wild phenomenon.
Yeah, and yeah, yeah, that is. Speaking to people in prison as well. I'm interviewing someone else that's in prison, been in prison for over 30 years right now. The interview's not gone out yet, and the violence that they've experienced within prisons, the slashings
Yeah.
that they've done, and you're like, well, imagine. I mean, I've been in prisons before, and the energy is just so heavy, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so
yeah.
heavy, you know.
To me, it feels like consciousness. Literally, like you just walk into a murder scene and it's just there.
Yeah.
It's resident. It's terrifying sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and again, you don't need to be in a prison to feel that energy. Sometimes you can
Right.
walk into a brand new home, and there's
Yeah.
just something wrong with it because it's the land that it's on. You know, it,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
and you've come across those stories where new property gets built on new lands, and that land had something
Mhm.
there before,
Yeah. Yeah.
someone there
I
before.
experienced that at 8 years old. Yeah. So it's real. And we can find that because all of my research is based upon biblical antiquity. And so I can find that in Genesis when Yahweh tells Cain, the blood of your brother cries out from me from the ground. It's a fascinating thing. But my work now is geared towards researching not just what these entities are, and that's what really bugs me. I don't. We got what they are. That's irrelevant to me. What is their belief system? What do they value? You know,
And when you say they're sanctioned to be there, sanctioned by who?
there. Okay, so there was a case. It was what's called an incubus case. An incubus, for those who don't, I know you know. For those who don't know, it's a male entity or an entity that appears as male, and it will coerce and groom a female victim into sexual intercourse. And not just that, that's not the end of it. And it's not just spiritual. There's actual substance, male substance that they've collected. But after that, the woman is then possessed. So Isaac Luria had a case where it was a debu, and a woman was possessed by it. She said, "Listen, I thought it was a dream. Next thing I know, I'm doing stuff I don't usually do." Blah blah blah. And next thing he knows, he's dealing with this entity. This entity looks at him, squares his shoulders, and says, "Listen, I'm allowed to be here." For anybody in the field of demonology, that should terrify us. And if it doesn't, it should at the very least capture our attention because that tells me that there's an authority, the belief system, in at least an hierarchy, to where if you do something, then it's invited, but that's not it. Now it's allowed to. And Isaac Luria confronted it with everything he had, and the entity said, "No, listen, I'm allowed to be here. You can't do anything about it." And again, that's something that a lot of people ignore, but it's very germane.
Absolutely, and I'm just going to shift this just right now, just a little bit. Obviously, I've been doing a series on channeling, which is continuing, and
Mhm.
who's to say some of these people that are channeling aren't channeling what they think they're channeling, right? So it comes
Right,
across as very loving, very useful. And
right,
I've only met one channeler that I can say really raised massive alarm bells with me that he wasn't channeling what he thought he was. Well, he was channeling
yeah,
something that was wise, as you say, they can come across as wise,
right,
but there
yeah,
is an inherent evilness with their behavior sometimes, and it comes from what they're
yeah.
channeling. A manipulation. That's probably a better word.
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. And you can find that as far back as John Dee and Edward Kelly. My goodness, John Dee was a luminary, a luminary of his generation. He was amazing, a wizard intellectual. And you have Edward Kelly who says, "Okay, we're gonna go reach out to this entity." Entity appeared as a beautiful handmaid. I mean, do this, and I'll give you all this information, all this wisdom. Came up with the Anarchic language, and then instantaneously it says, "Now, if you want more, again, here comes consent. If you want more information, more revelation. I want you guys to swap wives. Now, at that moment, what has happened there? There's a transition. It's no longer about thought processes. Now it wants you to do, not to hear, not to think, not to believe. We've already done that. Now I want you to do. What do you want me to do? And that is, again, in the swapping of wives, the spilling of blood in ritual blood sacrifices. There is a currency here that they're attracted to. The bloodthirst is not natural. And truthfully, if you, and I know you have, if people look at these serial killers, the act is never about the act. It's never about the act. If they could go eat and smoke a cigarette, get the same thing, they would. What is it that's operating here? You understand? Because that's a means to an end. Afterwards, there's something released.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Obviously, there's people suffering from mental health out there as well. And someone with mental health mixed in with an attachment is is it difficult to spot that, do you think? Or are they the easier ones to see that they've got something more to them?
I think they would be easier to see, because again, if you're dealing with someone who is, institutionalized, there would be implications of such an entity. And yet the value system would not be there. And number one. Number two, they wouldn't respond to it with the same kind of high and wholeness. I hate to say it like that, but it's true. The wholeness that these people feel, they don't respond to it in the same way. To them, it's just an act, and let's move on. There's no emotional attachment to it. I've known of people, serial killers, that will kill people, go to bed and see their victims and talk to them at nighttime. That won't happen. And so, it's a different belief system, and they'll talk differently about it. It's weird. It's like it's not really parallel or similar.
So someone with an attachment then that's going to do some heinous act, for example, it could
Yeah.
be their voice within their head that sounds like them. Doesn't sound like a foreign voice, but it sounds like them. That's that's guiding them on this journey of wherever they're going to end up. Or it could be just that, and the feelings that you never had before, the jealousy towards someone, or whatever root causes that bring up those emotions, whatever emotions it may be. But it causes the emotional side to come
Right.
through as well, right?
Yeah.
And that could, you say that the attachments sort of leave them maybe at some point when the act is carried out, or whatever, that they've kind of sucked everything out of them, but it could also stay with them.
It could. If it's, yeah. And again, it goes back to, see, I read a very chilling, another paper I read. I read all the time. So I read another paper yesterday talking about how in Ezekiel 13, when Yahweh was referring to soul hunters, these beings, these people, they were real people, they would go into the homes of their victims at nighttime, kill the person, capture their soul, and then wear a piece of their skin. Again, they would take a trophy. They would take a trophy with them. And that was how that they would feel as if that person was still a part of them. And one of the issues that text refers to, this is incredible, was how that these warriors believed that if they could possess a body, that their soul itself would be immortal. They could destroy the body, their soul would move on to someone else. And that was a belief system that they shared. That tells us that in many cases were being used as currency, as a garment in a sense. In that text, here's one for us. It says that these people were cloaked with an invisible cloak. We can't even see that which they're hiding behind. Predatory. We're being, again, and that gets into the pathology of this, but it's really a fascinating, disturbing nonetheless subject.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. So, what has been your sort of journey in the sort of spiritual side of your work as well, in the sense of the nature of the soul, or why are we here, kind of thing, which ties into some of the work that you're doing as well. Have you looked into that?
Yes, to understand the purpose and destiny, it's individual. There's a lot of people who have different giftings and destinies. But as far as the afterlife and the souls that we deal with, I have in my book that I'm writing right now what I call the inherited self. And the inherited self is the fact that when you die, your belief systems don't change. You're still the same person. You're still you have the same values and whatnot. And so that's why it really led me to believe, again, that these malevolent hauntings, even the hauntings and the possessions, the malevolent, like you're talking an entity who just, when he shows up, there's no comparison. He's intelligent, he's there, he knows. It's crazy. That really led me to believe that at the very minimum, some of these entities that are possessing people and murdering are the same bloodthirsty people who were embodied at once and possibly were possessed too by another person. You understand? It's a wild philosophy. That's a branch right there.
That's a branch, the victim on top of the victim. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's out the
Yeah,
box.
yeah, and that would make sense. Again, when you're looking at possession cases, specifically if it's a soul that needs help, it will go to someone who shares the same belief system. Why? Because that person will go to the pastor for what? Help. And so again, this possession idea, it's
Yeah.
larger.
Yeah, those voices in our head sometimes. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough.
Right,
I'm not,
right.
I'm not lovable enough.
Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. We've all been to those stages sometimes, probably without the possession. But again,
Right,
some of
thankfully.
us, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that have had, have invited things in that haven't been for their
Yeah.
best. Do you know what I mean? So yes, so your book there, the A Moment Called Man, obviously that's been coming up on the screen right now, and that was one of the reasons for getting you on. But obviously your work is so much more than just that one book,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there'll be other books that you're going to do as well. What was the most important message of that book, do you think?
I talked about the book was written for a friend of mine who overdosed on cocaine. He was an empath, and a lot of what empaths do is if they don't understand their giftings, they'll medicate what they're called to manifest, and that's what he did. And his medication was cocaine. And someone, I mean, obviously, I'm not a proponent of cocaine, but someone gave him 97% fentanyl, and so it was a virtual death sentence. But my most important thing I write in the book is helping people understand that their deficiencies are just as valuable as their beauty marks, and dealing with the what I call the disfigurement of destiny. Because in my research and in my field, there's been many times where you encounter entities and malevolent presences, and it just really it takes a piece of you every time. You'll never be the same person again. And so what I want to do is, in addition to pushing the beasts back into the darkness, I want to help fight for the light. So instead of displacing the spirit, I want to help the person who may not be possessed but is being worked on and
Absolutely.
groomed.
Now, you mentioned your house, I think were you born in Ohio? Was that where you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio, and I think it was around, was it 8 years old? Tell me if I'm wrong. That
Yeah.
yeah, you had your first sort of experience with something, like kind of haunting the house. I guess that's one way of
Yeah.
saying it, right? Just tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
What that experience was about.
Ooh, I was 8 years old. My parents, as you said, they purchased a new house. The very first day I was in the house, my dad takes me in the room by the hand and says, "This is going to be where you're going to be sleeping." I said, "Okay, fine." I smelled decomposition. Again, this all plays into the hand of victimhood and specifically death in the afterlife. I smelled decomposition. I saw a little girl underneath the bed, and I knew she was afraid of me. So when we left that house, I went to my dad and I said, "Listen, this is what I saw. This is what I experienced, and what is it?" Come to find out, the people who owned the house previously were elderly. They didn't, there was no little girl there. But yeah, so I began to experience, once we moved in, I began to experience shadow people, just a litany of different manifestations. And I always felt, even to this day, that the haunting phenomena was far less just something powerful and transcendent. It was a language. It's a language, just like when a profiler looks at someone who's a serial killer and reverse engineers the decisions, reverse engineers the footsteps. Some people will go into a crime scene and see a crime scene. Some people go in a haunting and see a haunting. Others will say, "Hey, listen, there's a belief system at work here. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. And again, just sticking with the younger years. I mean, and this is still current now. Your dad is currently a pastor.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yes,
And
sir.
what how would you class yourself right now? What are you, Catholic or?
Well, like I said, I grew up in what's called Pentecostalism, and it was a very strict environment. I wasn't allowed to wear shorts, no shorts, couldn't watch television. But when I turned 18, I kind of broke all those chains and really began to be a free thinker. Uh, but I don't know really, because I am used in certain empathic ways, but I'm not a medium. I don't. I'm a researcher. That's really it. And I just I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I want more. It's not enough that people are hurting.
So you're someone with abilities in some. You're open to sensing things. Let's just say that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, but obviously, you wouldn't call yourself. You wouldn't say that you're a spiritualist or something like that. Do you know what I mean? You would class yourself. How would you class your
I
your
don't know,
faith? Yeah.
because I'll tell you why. Because here it is. I'm a liminal being. I'm a being in between. I'm not here or not there. So for the religious people, they see me and say, we don't understand why he's doing this or how he's doing what he's doing. A lot of people think that demonology is demonolatry, which they think demonology is worshiping demons, and that's the dogmatists. He likes a porter beer and smokes a cigar. How is he doing what he's doing? And so they're confused. Makes sense. So I don't know. I think that a spiritualist. I don't know. And I even have parapsychologists who say, listen, you need to give up the title demonologist because you don't fit the bill.
Well, I wanted to say I was going to say demonologist rather than spiritualist, but I just wanted to see
Yeah.
is there something beyond the demonologist? What was your obviously you grew up a certain faith and now you've gone into this work. How does your father see the work that you're doing now? Is he quite supportive?
He is very supportive, and yeah, he is, until we get into the pathology and victimology of serial killers and your incubus cases. At that point, he's like, "Ooh, ooh," And I understand it's not for everybody. You understand it,
Hey, maybe you're helping him see a bigger picture by just doing the
but
work that you're doing as well. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of expanding
mhm.
where he left off in some sense. But okay, so a few things I wanted to get into quickly with your research. The symbols used in now let me get this right. I think there's sometimes there's symbology or symbols on the victims. Sometimes, isn't there? Um,
Yes,
yeah, that
hauntology.
yeah. Let's go with
Okay,
that.
okay. Well, yeah. So in hauntology and in possession cases, you're dealing with an entity who, this is fascinating branch of my research right here. Uh, Either they're ancient, and I think that's not true. Either they're ancient or their belief system that they're operating on is ancient. I say that because symbolism is the simplification of language. And so when you go into a haunted house or even a possession case, and you're dealing with an entity who is marking his victims with symbolism, that symbol is an iceberg. It is not the sum total of what it represents. It's referring back to something far larger. And so when you get into the debuts and incubus cases, there's a Franciscan priest, Father Sinistrari, who was the first one to reveal that after these women would be really taken over physically by these entities and possessed, that they would mark their victims in places that, number one, they couldn't reach, in their armpits, in their private parts. Matter of fact, he pulled up in the eyelids of one and found markings underneath their eyelids after they were deceased. So again, it's not enough, right? The pathology here, it's not enough that I terrify. It's not enough that I even possess them. It's not enough that I have them in every way possible. I want to mark them. And that was one of my issues when going into possession cases and hauntings is, are they marking their victims? Why are they marking us? And I think the reason is because it's the branding aspect of it. I took you or I took something from you, and you'll never be able to change it. Matter of fact, I'm going to mark you in ways you don't even realize. That right there is classic serial killer pathology.
Absolutely, it is. And obviously, we talked about what your father being a pastor and some of your background as well. But then, what
Mhm.
is the where does demonic possession fit in with the Catholic view? Then, in a sense, or is it the
Well,
same?
it's not the same, and it should be because your Catholicism as a whole, their demonology is what's called systematic demonology, and so you'll have names like Beelzebub and Leviathan, and so all their it's interesting because all their demons speak Latin, which right? It's very interesting, and so no, they have a very different system, and it's rooted in practice and in ritual. It's rooted in the Old Testament, specifically the ritual of throwing holy water on an unclean man. And yet, in Leviticus and Exodus, it specifically numbers, interestingly enough, that ritual was to dispel the uncleanness someone gets because they touched a dead person. Again, if we're dealing with deceased people, both entities, the malevolent and benevolent, then we have tools that we've never had before.
Absolute. That's we do. And what are some of the best cases, do you think, of demonic possession that have been captured on videotape as well, that you think or you feel that are really authentic? Because obviously we've got the movies out there like The Exorcist and everything else, but they're just
Mhm.
the movies. But what are some of the cases that you've looked into that you think, well,
I
that is
don't know.
genuine?
There hasn't been. Well, I could say this in 1999. Um, we have the woman in she was in Baghdad. Anyway, she was possessed by an entity, yeah, Dibuk, and you have a Kabbalistic rabbi who came in and they did a live video. They went through their rituals. I think that's been about in modernity. I think that's been about the most documented, you know, but nothing in the sense of you have someone who is regurgitating a substance or crawling up a wall. Now, it does happen, obviously, but these entities aren't the kinds of people who want cameras on them until they want on them.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Again, there's terms in your book about, for example, the unclean spirit. You talk about that as well. What is
Mhm.
the unclean spirit?
Well, oh, this is fascinating. So the unclean spirit is the demon. See, what happened in biblical antiquity is their demonology changes. It evolves according to the evolution of human thought and experience. So between the Old and New Testament, you have an unclean spirit. The unclean spirit is an English word. The Hebrew word really refers to something that really bleeds into everything we're talking about, and that is when someone touches a deceased person, they be unclean in the sense that they need a specific ritual done, and that specific ritual done happens to be everything that the Catholic exorcists do. So again, if we're dealing with a fallen angel, why are you throwing holy water trying to cleanse someone who touched a person that was dead? Does it make sense? There's more going on here.
Yeah, I mean, your work is pretty deep. I know we're almost at the top of the hour here right now, and there's just so much we could talk about, in some of the scripture work that you've done as well. Where do you see your work going?
I don't know. My friend, I have no idea. I mean, I know that it's a maddening hilarity at times because what I really know to be true is that history has been encountering and confronting entities who are what Rudolf Otto would call wholly other, and they would not have the ability to even comprehend and articulate what it is they're experiencing. And so, what I've been trying to do again is not to be enchanted with, oh my God, it's horns and hooves. This is what we caught on tape. No, 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 no. What I want to know is what is their world like? What is it that they're believing in? What is the currency here? Why is it that in Ezekiel 13 that these entities would go into homes at the moment these people were the most vulnerable? Again, I got chills. Again, because what we're seeing here are people who should not know what they know, right? Who should not have that predatory nature and awareness, who 1 second can be a school teacher, a Bible study leader, an elder, a deacon, and yet in one fleeting moment completely switch into something not just other than, but something way other than. And it's that polarity.
And how can we? What's one thing we could do to our homes just to, keep them clean in a sense?
If you're single, be centered, heal. If you're single, if you're single and you have trauma from life, from a divorce, a lost job, bankruptcy, maybe you're married and you lost a child, whatever it is, those voids in you, the emptinesses, see, the emptinesses that these entities will seek to fill for a relationship, you have to fill those. You have to step into those places so that there no longer is a place for them to latch a hold. So what I tell people a lot of times is if you're single, really be centered. Do what you love to do within context. If you're married, spend your time loving people and really tying in both yourself and loving and helping people. Because if that's it, that's really it, man.
And Nathan, what is your website?
It is njgillis.com.
Well, Nathan, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I've really appreciated having you on, and I'd like to get you back on in the future. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I can't wait, and thank you for having me.